Hello and welcome to the Turnkey Trader tutorial for understanding the trades. I would recommend that you have the master rules up to reference, which can be found in the members area under the master rules tab. And we have a tutorial video for each of the trades below the outline of the master rules. So we don't want to go over each individual trade, but I'd rather like to kind of cover the overall idea behind Turnkey Trader. And once we understand the rules, how we can use that to further increase our ability to identify trades that may fall under certain exceptions. So while the rules are a great place to start, as you get more experience, we do learn that there are certain situations that can let us bend some of the rules slightly. All right, so here we have a bounce trade. And while we can walk through the rules, we have our green background, we have our gold bar, our white line is above our orange line, which is above our 200 EMA. We don't really care what color the bracket is for the bounce trade. And our yellow line is above 0. Now you may hear me reference in other trainings that these are strongest when the yellow line has come from an extreme of 100 or above and dips below the right around the 25 to 0 range and kind of bounces off, which is why we call it a bounce trade. So while the trades are stronger when it comes from an extreme, that doesn't always have to be the case, but that's what we've seen be the most successful. And while the rules are a great outline to identifying these trades, eventually the idea is to just be able to identify the pattern almost. It becomes almost second nature, where rather than running through a checklist every time we see a possible trade, we can just watch how the market is moving. We see that the market is going long. We get a turn bar, and as the market starts to reverse, then I know that I can begin looking for a bounce if the market starts to reverse again, as that is the pattern. And everything is color-coded. Very nice to make it really easy to identify when we're looking for a long trade or a short trade. So now that we've taken an example of one of our trade types, the bounce trade, I'd like to talk about the overall idea or strategy with Turnkey Trader. So you will notice that these bars are quite large and can sometimes take a while to plot, and that's okay. That's actually what we want to see. That's what these bars were designed to do, is help us ride out all of that other noise that we may see looking at other charts. And as an example, I'd like to just pull a little side by side here. So here we have a minute chart just to show how much movement it had. So this bar took about 5 minutes to plot, roughly from 1025 to 1029, 1030. So we can see that we have a lot of little up and down moves here that all happen within one of our large bars. So a lot of retracement back and forth, and sometimes it can be even more dramatic than that. So our idea is to wait for all of that back and forth movement to work itself out and let the buyers and sellers fight it out, and we look to get in after one side has won and starts moving the market in our anticipated direction. So since we have an overall long trend, we expect the buyers to push the price up, and we want to let them work all that out in here and get in at our green DPI price at the top of the bar, essentially confirming the momentum of the market. And we have our multiple indicators to do that. Now, a few points that can really add strength to some of our trades. So if you're first starting out and maybe only want to take the most strictly qualified trades at first, the main one is looking at extremes on the yellow line. So we really like to see this yellow line come from an extreme for our trades. So for a bounce long, we'd usually see the yellow line up around the 100 area, 100 or above, meaning that there's a lot of pressure going long, and we expect eventually that's going to reverse and the market's going to go down for a period. And we usually see that follow this pattern, following our yellow line, dips down here and bounces off one of these levels, either the 25 or the 0, is a fairly common point. It won't always be exactly on 25 or 0. Somewhere in between there, or sometimes a little above 25, is also acceptable. And of course, there will be times where the yellow line comes down from an extreme and the trend is so strong that it's a very small dip before it just continues on. And that really depends on how the overall trend is for the day. And for something like a trend trade, which this right here was almost a trend trade, it was pretty close. Looks like it didn't quite touch the orange line. If you refer to our rules, we do need it to cross the orange line to fully qualify. And we usually like to see this come from an extreme, or all the way from negative 100 or below, before we get to the area where we like to see a trend trade qualify. And also, the overall trend can lend strength to some of our trades. So if we get into a situation like this where I had a bounce and I get some retracement, I may possibly have a trend trade to enter, but I didn't come from an extreme. Well, depending on the overall trend of the market for that day, we may not have seen the yellow line come from an extreme for quite some time. But if the overall trend is strong, that adds a lot of strength to the trend trade. Rather than disqualifying it because it didn't come from an extreme in that instance, the strong trend actually adds strength. And that the trend is so strong that it's not letting the market reverse enough that we would see that fluctuation between extremes. A few things to keep in mind as you're learning the system. We do recommend, of course, practicing in Sim until you get familiar with the rules. You can have the rules on a separate screen while you practice, but I would encourage, once you start to get the hang of them, try to enter some trades without referencing the rules and see how you do, and then go back and check your work against the rules. It's an excellent way to practice and jumpstart your knowledge with understanding and identifying the turnkey trader trade setup. Join us in our next video where we'll go over how to access your member resources.